Thank you very much, Ali, and thank you all for joining us. This is Chris Islip, the Executive Director for the Montana World Affairs Council. We're really excited to have all of those classrooms across Montana with us today. Before I introduce our guests, I'd like to thank our Council in the Classroom and GeoQuest sponsors. That's the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Cutter Foundation International, Allegiance, BNSF Railway Foundation, First Interstate Bank, Trail West Bank, and the Consulate of Ireland in San Francisco. One more thank you, because this is our fourth and final online interaction with students. Your work will continue on the online platform, but thanks to you students and teachers for joining us, and special thanks to Kathleen and Ali at Inspired Classroom for helping so much in bringing this thing to life. Now let me introduce today's guest. Ambassador Daniel Mulhall took up duty as Ireland's 18th ambassador to the United States in August 2017. He was born and brought up in Waterford and undertook his undergraduate and postgraduate studies at University College Cork, where he specialized in modern Irish history. Ambassador Mulhall joined the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1978 and has, and had his early diplomatic assignments in New Delhi, Vienna, Brussels, and Edinburgh, where he was Ireland's first consul general in 1998. He served as Ireland's ambassador to Malaysia and to Germany. Before coming to Washington, where he is now, he served as Ireland's ambassador to London. During his diplomatic career, Ambassador Mulhall has also held a number of positions at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, including as Director General for European Affairs, as a member of the Secretariat for the Forum of Peace and Reconciliation, and was the department's press counselor. Ambassador Mulhall maintains a keen interest in Irish history and literature. He's the author of A New Day Dawning, A Portrait of Ireland in 1900, and co-editor of The Shaping of Modern Ireland, A Centenary Assessment. Daniel Mulhall is married to Greta, and they have a daughter and a son. Ambassador, thank you so much for coming. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and greetings to all of the classrooms that I'm looking at on screen here. I hope at some time I'll be able to visit Montana again in person and maybe visit some of your classrooms to talk to you face to face. But this is the best we can do for the moment because we have to deal with this pandemic, and all over the world, people are having to resort to Zoom calls like this. But it's great to be able to connect with pupils all over the large and impressive state of Montana. I have actually been to Montana already. I went there on a vacation last year and visited the Yellowstone National Park. And I really enjoyed being there, but I desperately want to get back for a number of reasons. First of all, because in your state, of the 1 million people who live in Montana, about 150,000 of them have a heritage that comes from Ireland. In other words, their grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents came from Ireland to settle in Montana, mainly to work in the mines when Montana was a great mining territory in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So that's a very good reason for wanting to go to Montana, to link up, to connect with those people of Irish descent who now live in Montana. So if you look around you, if you see 7 people in Montana, one of them will have family who came originally from Ireland. That's how many people there are in Montana with an Irish background. The second reason is that my hometown of Waterford in the southeast of Ireland, with a population of 50,000 people, is the birthplace of the first governor of Montana, Thomas Francis Meagher, who was an Irish patriot and a Civil War general who ended up as the first governor of the state of Montana. So those are 2 reasons why I desperately want to get to Montana. And in fact, in your capital, your state capital of Helena, or Helena, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but anyway, one of those pronunciations is probably correct, maybe not, but we'll see. I'll be corrected afterwards by one of the students, I'm sure. But in the state capital, there is a statue of General Meagher, or Governor Meagher, on horseback. And there's a similar statue in my hometown of Waterford. So I really would like to see those 2. I've already seen the one in Waterford, of course, many times. And I really would like to see the one in Montana. So how do I explain Ireland to you? Students, pupils, living all over the large and wonderful state of Montana. First of all, one big difference. Ireland is an island, which means that we have sea all around us. Montana is a state with the sea is a long way from you. You'd have to drive, I guess, the best part of a day to get to the West Coast and probably 2 or 3 days to get to the East Coast to go to the sea. Whereas in Ireland, most people live within maybe a half an hour's drive of the sea. That's a huge difference. But it also means, of course, that you can get into your car or your parents' car, and your parents can drive you to California. And you don't have to cross any sea or any ocean. You simply can drive there in your own private car. We can't do that. When we leave the island of Ireland, we have to get onto a ferry to go to France or to go to Britain. And then we drive on from there all over Europe from France. So that makes a big difference. Or we have to fly. We want to leave the island. We have to either get a boat or we have to fly. And that, of course, means that it's more difficult for people to leave the island of Ireland. But most people do because we're used to living on an island, and we try to get away whenever we need to for business purposes, for tourism, or to visit family. And a lot of Irish people have relatives who live around the world, particularly in Britain and all over Europe and in the United States, where there are about maybe 35 million people with an Irish background whose families came originally from Ireland. The second thing I would say is size. Montana, one of the 50 states of these United States, is 5 times as big as Ireland. Okay? So by our standards, you're huge. It's a huge state. But the other big difference is that our population is 5 times yours. So we have only 1/5 of the land of Montana, but we have 5 times the population, 5 million people. That also makes a big difference because, of course, you are very spread out all over Montana. I know there are school groups here from all over your state, some quite small schools. In Ireland, most people live within 20 minutes of a town. So most of our students go to schools in towns. They don't go to school in their local area by and large. They travel maybe to the nearest town. And that's a big difference too, because of course, in your case, it's not possible to do that in many cases because the country, your state is so big. Of course, there are other things about Ireland that you probably need to know. And the first is that our island, which is 1/5 the size of Montana, is divided because the northern part belongs to the United Kingdom, its capital being London, and the southern part is an independent country. Its capital is in Dublin. And that border is like the border between Wyoming and Montana. It's like the border between Montana and Idaho, in that when you drive across the border, you don't know you're crossing a border. You don't have to show a passport. You just travel across the border, no problems. But it's in a different country. And Northern Ireland is divided, the population. Some of them think of themselves as being British. Others see themselves as Irish. And that's why there's been a bit of trouble there over the last 40 years. Happily now, we have a peaceful island. We've no more problems, that kind. But still, people have different views. They see themselves in different ways. And that's an issue that we have to deal with. Some people would like our country, our island, to be united. But that's something for the future. And it will only happen when the people of both sides of our island decide they want to come together. Our economy is very different from yours. I'd say 50 years ago, the Irish economy and the economy of Montana would have been very similar because they would have been agriculturally based. We have a lot of farms with cattle, dairy farms where you produce milk and cheese and butter, and a lot of fishing industry because we have the ocean around Ireland is full of fish. So a lot of people are involved in fishing. But in the last 50 years, a lot of American companies have moved into Ireland. So companies you would know about, that you would be familiar with, have big offices in Ireland. Facebook, for example, Amazon, Twitter, Microsoft, who make the computer software, Apple. All of them have big factories in Ireland. And in fact, they those factories in Ireland cover the whole of Europe. In other words, they export products from those companies all over Europe and beyond from Ireland. Also, a lot of medicines are now made in Ireland and are exported back to the United States. So we have a lot of links with this country. And that's important too, because it means that our country, a lot of, in the past, Irish people had to leave our country because there were no jobs for them. And they had to come to places like the United States and places like Montana. Today, many people come to Ireland from other countries to live and work. And at the moment, out of our population, 1 in every 6 people living in Ireland today was not born in Ireland. They come from other European countries, mainly Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, places you can look up on the map. I'm sure your teachers will show you where those countries are. So the last couple of points I want to make is about the way of life in Ireland, the culture. And of course, we're an English-speaking country, which means we have a lot of writers who write in English, including some children's authors, like Owen Colfer, who's the author of Artemis Fowl. Some of you may have read his books. We have a lot of actors who are take part in Hollywood movies who are Irish born. You might not know that because, you know, they obviously when they're acting here, they use American accents, but they are Irish born. And we have a lot of pop singers. Now, I don't know, it's hard for me to know what kind of music you listen to at your age in Montana, but for example, Niall Horan from One Direction, which was a very popular band a few years ago. He's now a solo artist, is Irish, and I know him. I met him when I was in London. So we have a lot of good pop music performers in Ireland, which is a very good thing. Your parents would know a lot of the older Irish bands like U2. Actually, maybe your grandparents more than your parents, I suspect. But anyway, so there's a strong tradition of pop music. However, the other thing about it is that we have our own music, which doesn't sound like pop music at all. It's usually played on a fiddle and an accordion and a drum, an Irish drum called a bodhrán. And it sounds very different from pop music or from country music. We have our own dance form. I'm sure your teachers can look up and show you a video of River Dance, which is a very popular show, still being performed all over the world. And that's based on Irish dancing. It's very different dancing from Western swing, which I've seen in Montana, and from other dance forms. So a very distinctive form of dance. I'm sure your teachers can get you a video of that and show it to you in your classroom, maybe. And then we have our own games. So although we play soccer, we play rugby, we have 2 national games that are only played in Ireland. One of them is called Irish football, which has 15 players on each side, and you can catch the ball with your hands, unlike soccer. And you can run with the ball, you can bounce it off your foot, and you score a goal into the net. You get 3 points. Put the ball over the crossbar, and you get 1 point. And this game is very popular in Ireland. It's the finals in normal years would attract 85,000 people to the main stadium in Dublin. So people love our native games. We have a second game, which is called hurling. It's a little bit like lacrosse, except it's played with a stick rather than a net. It's a very fast game, small ball, 50 aside, very skillful game, played by amateur players. But again, the final games in the tournament, the annual tournament, will attract 85,000 spectators to the main stadium. I have a story, by the way, about lacrosse in Ireland. I didn't know that Ireland had a lacrosse team. We have a national lacrosse team. I had no idea. I'd never heard of it. I've never seen lacrosse played, by the way. But I discovered recently that we have a lacrosse team. You know how I discovered that? Because the Irish lacrosse team was invited to play in a stadium. Oh, sorry, in a tournament here in America next year. And there were 16 teams invited to play in that tournament. So a world tournament. So first time for the Irish lacrosse team to play in a world tournament. They were very excited about it, but they gave up their place in the tournament because they discovered that the Iroquois nationals were made up of Native American players were not invited to the tournament. So the Irish lacrosse team gave up their place and said it should be given instead to the Iroquois nationals. And that was a very good story of sporting generosity, because the Irish lacrosse players knew that while lacrosse for them is a game they love to play, it's not part of Ireland's national culture, but it is part of the culture of the Iroquois nationals. So the Iroquois nationals have taken the place of the Irish lacrosse team in this tournament to be played next year. So that's my story about Ireland. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I'm happy to ask you a few questions as well if you think that might be helpful.
Well, this is
I'm sure that the pupils of Montana have lots of questions ready for me. Who's going to be first?
This is wonderful. We have a bunch of schools on. So I'm going to go through the schools and we'll call on each school so that everybody gets an opportunity. And you can ask a question, you can share a Montana fact, or an observation of a similarity between Montana and Ireland with Ambassador Mulhall, or all three. So I'd like to go ahead and start us off in Potomac. Potomac, are you there?
I thought Potomac was near Washington.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. What traditional foods is there in Ireland, and what is your favorite?
First of all, a lot of people in Ireland now eat Indian, Chinese, Italian, Thai food. So probably they're the most popular foods, and French food as well, very popular in Ireland. But traditionally, we would have been a country that ate a lot of potatoes because we grow a lot of potatoes. And the reason why so many Irish people ended up in the United States is 150, 170 years ago, when most Irish people lived off potatoes. The potato crop failed. A disease wiped out the crop, and 1 million people starved in Ireland, and 1 million more left, mainly to go to the United States to get a proper life for themselves and their families. So potato is the kind of traditional food of Ireland. And we do have a potato dish that I like, which is called boxty, which is basically a potato cake. And that's a traditional food that I like. But as I say, most people now in Ireland tend to eat more international cuisine rather than traditional Irish dishes. There's also, of course, Irish stew, which is a mutton stew, which is popular as well. But again, it's more a traditional thing. I would have had a lot of it when I was growing up. But we have a lot of beef and lamb. So most of our dishes are traditional dishes. When I was growing up, would have been, you know, a leg of lamb or roast beef or so on. So we tended to eat the meats that we produced in Ireland. But now people are much more adventurous, and a lot more seafood now, a lot more fish being eaten. Of course, being surrounded by water, fish is obviously very fresh and very, very freely available.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's move to Drummond. Okay, let's see. Mrs. Oberweiser's class, are you there?
We're coming. Annabelle or Joe? Joe is going to ask a question.
Does Ireland have like winters like Montana with like a lot of snow and like sub-zero temperatures?
No, no. The short answer is we have a very mild winter and a very mild summer. So our temperatures rarely get above 80 degrees in summer, and rarely get below freezing in winter. So now in recent years, when I was growing up, I remember maybe snow would fall for a few days once a year, but a very little snow, just a small amount of snow. But in recent years, we've been having a lot more snow, and now we get maybe 2 weeks of snow most winters, but it doesn't last very long, and the country more or less closes down because we're not able to cope. We don't have it so often. So therefore, when we have heavy snow, it tends to block the roads and so on. So, and people tend to have to stay at home, but it usually melts after a few days and people get back to normal again. So very little snow, and certainly none of the temperatures that you get in Montana by any means. No, I mean, at night it might go down to 25, something like that, maybe 20 Fahrenheit, but that's about it, really. Not below that.
Well, by comparison, I don't know about Drummond, but I suspect it's true. We woke up in Missoula with some fresh snow on the ground this morning. So it's already started this winter. Okay, we are going to move.
How's it? Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yes. We are
No, I
going
should
to
visit in summer, should I?
Well, it depends. If you like skiing and you don't mind the snow, come out, I guess, starting in November. But otherwise, come out in the summer. Let's move over to Hayes Lodgepole with Mr. Condon's class.
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, yeah, I didn't know. Well, normally I'm working on the Hayes Lodgepole School, which is on the Fort Belknap Reservation in the middle of Montana. But at the moment, I'm actually on the, I have another house here at the entrance of Yellowstone. So I'm actually in Gardner, Montana, just outside the park. I guess my question is, and this is just kind of more for interest than anything else. So what's the migration rate between, if you know this, between America and Ireland, or Ireland and America? Do more people go to live in Ireland every year, or do more people go from Ireland to live in America every year?
Well, that's a very good question. Most of our migration, and you're an Australian, aren't you? I think you are. I think I got your accent. And my wife's Australian, so I know Australia pretty well. Anyway, no, look.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. Yeah, I'm a New Zealander. Yeah.
You're a New Zealander. Okay, I apologize for calling you an Australian. That's dreadful. I mean, I know that's a terrible thing to say to a New Zealander. It's a bit like calling an Irish person British, you know, it's kind of a,
very true, very true.
Really sticks in our guts. No, okay. So the story is that most of our migration comes from Europe. So we have 150,000 Poles who live in Ireland. We have about 50,000 Lithuanians, 40,000 Latvians, 50,000 Bulgarians, Romanians, Czechs, and so on. Irish people still emigrate, but they tend to go now more to Australia, where a lot of younger people go there for a couple of years. New Zealand as well. Canada is very popular, actually, because Canada is open for immigration. Somebody who wants to maybe try a new life, maybe might go to Canada. Particularly Vancouver is very popular, Toronto and so on. In terms of America, there's very little opportunity now for Irish people to come into America, because we get a very small number of green cards from the lottery, and then of course you have people coming in working with Google and Amazon and those, and they come in on sort of special visas, which are a little more difficult to get these days as well. Americans more and more moving to Ireland. A lot of people go, if they have Irish heritage, they go and study in Ireland, they work in Ireland, and that's fine, because a lot of them have Irish passports. If you have one Irish grandparent, you're entitled to live and work in Ireland. So a lot of people do that. But, you know, the numbers, there are probably, I would guess, less than 10,000 Americans who live in Ireland. There are 125,000 Irish people living in America, Irish-born people. But of course, there are 35 million people of Irish descent. So it's a small flow at the moment, but we'd like to see it develop. We'd like to see more Irish people coming in here. We'd like to see more Americans coming to Ireland, and we're trying to make it easier for them to do that. A lot of people go and retire there because, you know, we have a scheme for retirement. If you have a certain amount of money, a certain annual income, you can come in and you can settle in Ireland. And a lot of people do that. A lot of Americans have second homes in Ireland and go there every year, in normal years, not this year, obviously, but in normal years they go there.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. Now, let's go to Hall, Montana, in Miss Perry's class.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so we had a couple of questions.
Hello, my name's Archer from Hall School. Can you tell us more about?
Back again.
Oh.
Okay, yep, we see you. Go ahead, Arthur.
I was kicked out for a minute there. You know.
Can you tell us more about your book, A New Day Dawning?
Well, the reason I wrote the book was because I wanted to write a book for the new century. You know, when it started in 2000, the year 2000. So I thought about, how did I look back to Ireland, what it was 100 years before in 1900? So I started researching that period. And of course, it was a very important period for Ireland because we were, at the time, we were part of the United Kingdom. We weren't an independent country. And, you know, a lot of people thought we might never become an independent country. But things started happening around 1900. People started learning our own native language, which I forgot to mention. We have our own language. We call it Irish, but some people call it Gaelic. And for example, if I say to you, you're welcome, I say, Tocéad Míle Fáilte Róid. It's a totally different language, different family of languages. And Tocéad Míle Fáilte Róid means 100,000 welcomes to you. So in other words, you don't just say welcome, you say 100,000 welcomes. So it's a very old-fashioned kind of language, very old-world language. So people started to speak the Irish language more and more 100 years, about 120 years ago in 1900. And then we had a lot of writers who, and we started to really start to complain about being part of the UK. We didn't want to be part of Britain. So I wanted to look at that period when Ireland was changing, when people were beginning to think about becoming independent. Because before that time, it was only, what we were looking for then was we wanted our own parliament. We wanted to be like a state, to have our own local parliament, like Montana has a parliament, but not to become independent. So, so I wanted to look at that period in 1900. And it was a fascinating period to look at because things were changing rapidly. And I always like to look at it, as a historian writing a book, you want to look at a country or a state when it's changing. You don't want to look at it when it's sort of stable and stationary. You want to look at change. And that's why I chose the period 1900, apart from the fact, of course, that it was 100 years before the year 2000, and it was the last time a new century started.
Ambassador Mulhall, before we go on, we got a message that you have a hard stop at 9:45. Is that
correct? No. I would say 9:55 actually.
Okay. Oh, good.
I have another Zoom call at 10 o'clock your time.
Okay, we just wanted to be respectful of your time to make sure.
I'm actually talking to our immigration centers about the immigration and whether we can find ways of getting more Irish people to get in here. So that's what I'm doing. But anyway, so it relates back to one of the questions.
It absolutely does. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Hall, did you have one other question? You said you had a couple.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Another question was, what do people do for recreation or holiday in Ireland? Do they generally leave the island, or do you have a favorite thing to do there?
Well, of course, this year, hardly anybody left the island. Everyone stayed at home. So people started to explore their own country. When I was a boy growing up, most people holidayed locally, holidayed somewhere in Ireland. But in the last 30 years, I would say the vast majority of Irish people spend their holidays in Spain or Portugal or Italy or France or Greece or Turkey. Basically, they go to resorts, they go to seaside resorts in those countries. And a lot of Irish people have second homes in Spain and Portugal and Italy and France. So it's all changed completely because there are now flights to every tourist resort in Europe has cheap flights from Ireland. So, I mean, even students, when they finish their, their final high school exams, they tend to go off together on these trips, and it's not always a good thing, but it happens anyway. And but this year has been totally different. This year, most people have stayed at home and holidayed at home. But in normal times, Irish people would go on holidays to Spain. Spain is the most popular because there are many big resorts there, but Portugal is also popular, and so is France, and so is Turkey is increasingly popular now because it's less expensive to go there.
Wonderful. Let's move on to Christy's class in Gardner.
Gardner. Pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to check the map of Montana so I can see where all these places are.
We'll send you a list.
Thank you.
Good morning. Gardner is right by Yellowstone National Park. I have two students that want to ask.
But I've been there. I've been there.
Yeah, I figured you did when you said that. Go ahead, make
Yeah.
sure.
I'm Maggie Dar. I'm Maggie Dar. I'm from Gardner Public School. I'm in 7th grade. My question is, do you think that Ireland is going to become more modernized over time and like become like places like New York City, or is it going to stay like it is like in Dublin?
Well, I mean, it has been modernized greatly. I mean, you know, it's if you go to Dublin now, you know, it's a very modern city. It's got lots of, you know, high-rise office blocks and so on, a bit like, not quite the height of American cities. We don't have sort of, you know, 50, 100 floor high-rise building, but we do have a lot of high-rise buildings in Dublin now, and increasingly developed, increasingly Irish people are highly educated now. We have about 6 of every 10 people who leave high school go on to university. So we have a very high level of people who are educated at university level, which has changed our country greatly. So now, will it ever become like New York? No, because our culture is still a little bit rural in that most Irish people, they may live in Dublin, but their parents may come from down the country or from somewhere rural areas. So the culture that we have tends to be more rural than urban. So we didn't really have factories in Ireland much until the last maybe 50 years. So we don't have that kind of urban culture of the kind you find in other parts. I would imagine it's a bit more like Montana in a way, you know, obviously more urbanized, more people, and you know, more industrial than Montana. But in terms of people really hold on to their traditions, and that's why our own music is still popular. People love our own music. Our own dancing is popular. Most Irish kids do Irish dancing. It's part of their growing up. They do the dancing. And a lot of them go on and perform at a high level. We love our own games, for example. So that keeps us from becoming like New York or a big city anywhere else in the world, because we have our own distinctive national traditions, which we cling to. I mean, honestly, if you were in Ireland during the summer, a normal summer, people are so excited about the local hurling and Gaelic football and Irish football competitions. They really get excited about them. And that's something you don't get, obviously, in most countries. But Ireland's very, very, very rural still. And for example, if you want to play for your local team in Ireland, you have to be born in that area. You cannot play for a team other than your own local team. So it's an amateur game, and people love it because all the players who play for the team are all local people. They work in the locality. They have other jobs. And they, they become local heroes in a way. So I think the culture is a bit different from what you'd find in American cities.
Yeah, I have one more question. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Garrett Klein. I am in 7th grade from Gardner Public Schools. And my question is, what is the oldest artifact found on the island?
Well, the most famous artifact is the Book of Kells, which is currently in Trinity College, Dublin, which is one of our leading universities. And it's a manuscript of the 4 Gospels produced in the 8th century, so 1200 years ago. And it was produced in a monastery. And it's a very, very very heavily illuminated. In other words, every page has got beautiful designs on it, but it contains the text of the 4 Gospels, and it's written in a kind of a very elaborate script, but in Latin. So that's probably the most famous artifact. There are also obviously, for example, there is a place called the Skellig. Now, you don't know the Skellig, but you will have seen the Skellig if you've ever seen a Star Wars movie, okay? Because the Skellig in the Star Wars is where the Jedi come from, okay? And the Skellig is an island about 12 miles off the coast of Ireland. And monks live there. And they built these stone huts. And those stone huts are probably 1,500 years old. So they're probably the oldest artifacts. Now you will find Roman artifacts and earlier artifacts, pieces of archaeology, but in terms of significant pieces of physical culture, I would say the most famous is the Book of Kells. There are also a few chalices and brooches that are very ancient. And then you've got the Skellig, the home of the Jedi, which is really the home of these wonderful beehive huts. They look like beehives, but they're actually made of stone. And the monks live there for their whole lives on this island, praying and making manuscripts.
Thank you so much. We have one last school, this is Hudson,
Fine.
or Hope School. Hudson that has not had an opportunity to ask questions, and I want to make sure we give them a chance.
Okay.
And then I do have several
I have
questions.
4 more minutes, so I'm fine. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll let them go. Quick.
We just wanted to hear a little bit about Midsummer.
But what? So I didn't catch that.
A little bit about Midsummer.
Oh, Midsummer. Yeah. Well, Midsummer. Well, the best feature of the summer in Ireland is that the days are very long. So it gets bright in June. It gets bright in the morning about 4 o'clock, and it doesn't get dark until 10:30. So you have a very long day. So if you want to go to Ireland in June, you have to be, you can do a lot of things, in daylight. And now it doesn't get very hot, but it does. The days are very long, and if the weather is nice, it's a very, very attractive time of year to be in Ireland, because you can be out until 10:30 at night and it's still bright. So that's the main feature of midsummer in Ireland. We don't have any real midsummer customs. Our customs are mainly winter customs. For example, you recently had Halloween. Halloween comes from Ireland. Halloween is an Irish festival that the Irish brought to America with them. And you've, of course, taken it on and you've changed it a bit, but it's originally an Irish festival. And in Gaelic, it's called Samhain, but it's Halloween. So that is a festival, a winter festival that comes from Ireland.
Thank you so much. I feel that we are out of time, and we so appreciate you staying a few minutes more to answer questions. Chris, do you have any last remarks for the ambassador?
Last words, Ambassador, is simply thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to Inspired Classrooms and all of those students who are out there who are listening to this today. And this is the fourth and final interaction that we have with people like you, Ambassador, who have really lent their expertise on their home countries to us. And I think at the end of this, we find out, sure, there are plenty of differences, but there are a lot of similarities. Despite the fact that you're thousands of miles away in Ireland, here in Montana, we have so many interesting similarities as well. So thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome. And I look forward to visiting some of those schools in person sometime. Okay.
Hear, hear.